Really appreciate it. So pavement markings. I was asked to do this presentation by OMB. They felt like it was a very important aspect of the roadway system, and they were really interested in some of the different aspects of pavement markings. And so they asked me particularly to give this presentation because I do a lot of work with pavement markings. I have a lot of pavement marking projects, primarily for the local road system, and it is a major component of the State Highway Safety Plan. So last estimates that I read, about $2 billion a year is spent on pavement markings annually from a variety of different governmental systems. They are considered to be a proven safety countermeasure. So if you go to the FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration's proven safety countermeasure lists, upgraded pavement markings, curb delineation, that is a major aspect of our system. So that's why we do have a lot of our pavement marking programs to upgrade our pavement markings are funded through highway safety. So, sometimes when you're driving down the road, you might ask, how did they choose these particular pavement markings for the roadway? The pavement markings are really guided in the United States by the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's really to ensure that pavement markings are consistent throughout the United States for the operation of roadways on our operation of vehicles on our roadways. So you don't want to have to go over to another state and have experience totally different colors, totally different pavement markings, and not be unsure as to how to operate the vehicle. So it's very important to have standardization for that to ensure that people are able to navigate our roadways safely. So the Federal Highway Administration, which is a division of the Federal Department of Transportation, is the main publisher of the MUTCD, and it is a big legal document. It provides legal justifications for people to make these decisions. That it's not just based on willy-nilly. It is based on a legal framework that's been decided on for best practices by a group of engineers with the federal government. So actually, right now, the last time it was updated was in 2009. There's actually a big update going on right now that some local officials from the former Assistant Secretary for DOTD, Dan Magri, I know he's working on it. Some other folks are working on it with the state. And, hopefully we'll see that soon. There is one competing guidebook a lot of people use, which is the NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Will sometimes use that. That's more geared towards like bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Sometimes there'll be a national meeting and people will be talking about that, but we don't use that in Louisiana, at least not here. So you won't see anything from, but you might hear that if you're talking to people who are working nationally on pavement markings. So a lot of things that you will read in the MUTCD is shall, should, and may. And these are three different words that guide the selection of pavement markings. Shall obviously required, mandatory, specific, or specifically prohibitive practice. So this is like really, when you have to do something, obviously you can't modify or compromise it. You can't use discretion or engineering judgment, which is a common term that people use when working with pavement markings on the roadway. It's a term that basically means if the engineer has studied it and it feels like it's in their judgment, they can make some modifications or changes, but with shall, like that's prohibited. Now, should is an advisory, best practice, typical situation. So deviation is appropriate if it's by engineering judgment or study. So it's kind of a guidance. Best practices said you should do this. And then may is permissive or optional without requirement or recommendation. And so basically, if you're in some certain situations and you think this would be the best thing, you may do it. An example is sometimes you'll be in certain roadway situations where it allows you to put in different types of striping. If you have a local road where you feel like you're having a safety issue, you might want to look at doing some edge line striping, even if it doesn't exactly meet like the conditions where you have to put in that edge line striping. So we have some projects like that where we're kind of upgrading the striping on roads that are local and they're kind of below the traffic volumes, which we typically stripe them, but because they have people issues with people running off the roadway, that striping really helps keep them on there, and we're kind of putting them in there. So 5 requirements in the MUTCD. So 5 basic requirements, traffic control devices. They have to fulfill a need, obviously. You don't just want to go and create a cluttered roadway. Obviously, that really takes away from people complying with the pavement markings or traffic control devices. So, we want to really, make sure that we're putting something out there. It's for a reason. So command attention. Okay, so that's a big aspect of this. We want to make sure people can see what the pavement markings are. Again, I'm going to talk a lot about edge line striping a lot, because that's a lot of what I do. But, we really want to make people, when they see that edge of the roadway, they know they need to stay in between the center line and the edge line. They need to not run off. So we want to make it really highly visible. And so people know where they're supposed to operate their vehicle on the roadway. And then obviously command respect. That's a big issue in terms of maintenance. And then, a lot of these facilities, I mean, they're kind of, we're kind of really basing the operation of them on people making the best choices. And we want to make sure that people know that when they drive safely and when they're following the traffic control devices and the traffic controls markings on the roadway, that they're doing it to comply with the regulation for, to make them to stay on the roadway and to do it for good reason. So we definitely want to make sure that, that's why we want to make sure that we don't clutter it too much, or people will start to disregard them. They won't respect, like, hey, you need to stop here. If there's a stop bar, you need to stay on the roadway, because otherwise you can put yourself in a dangerous situation. And we want them to have one simple message. It's always good, obviously, to have less complexity on the roadway when people are trying to make decisions on how they should operate their vehicle. And the last thing is really want people to have adequate time for a proper response. So that's why you'll see in there the speed requirement. So like if you have posted speed, you should start certain markings a little bit earlier. If it's a higher speed than if it's a lower speed. If it's in urban context than in a rural context, you'll see some of that be different. And that's because you need to give people time to make those right decisions so they can stay safe on the roadway. So retroreflectivity, this is a really big part. A lot of what I do actually is getting improvements to pavement markings to increase the retroreflectivity, because I work a lot on local roads where there isn't a lot of high quality pavement markings. They don't have the retroreflectivity. So there's kind of a little diagram at the bottom that kind of shows what happens. Basically, there's glass bead that's mixed in with the pavement markings, and it allows kind of the light to be reflected back into the driver's eyes instead of just all over the place. And you'll see this a lot, in your higher volume roads. It's pretty much like standard now, I think, on most of your higher volume roads to use really high quality retroreflectivity, because it is so effective at improving the safety of the roadway. So it's really great technological innovation, and a lot of what I do is trying to work with local governments to improve their pavement markings, and this is a big part of it. So again, there's different factors in how pavement markings are selected. A big one is roadway width. Depending on the width of the roadway, you can't put in edge line or center line striping. That's all factored into that. Traffic volumes, you have more requirements the higher the traffic volumes are, to ensure the safety of motorists on the roadway. Posted speed, again, we talked about how speed works in the decision-making process when you're driving and when you know how to change lanes, or if you should, that kind of thing. And it affects like when you start certain tapers and stuff like that. And then engineering study, kind of mentioned that before, but like if we have areas where we need increased striping or improved striping due to safety issues or traffic issues, like that's a big part of it. So colors of pavement marking. Again, we talked about standardization, very important. This is obviously highly regulated. My daughter today asked me some very interesting questions about pavement markings. She wants to know why there were no pink pavement markings. She also wanted a pink traffic signal. I was like, that's not how this works. But yeah, they're very regulated on what kind of pavement markings you can use and what colors you can use. So the one probably everyone's most familiar with is yellow and white. You know, yellow separation of traffic in opposite directions. That's the one you're going to see the most, because the vast majority of our roadways, especially in Acadiana, is going to be 2-lane undivided roadways with 2-way traffic. So that yellow, the yellow center line is very important. You can also use those on the left-hand edge of roadways and divided highways and one-way streets and ramps. Separation of 2-way left turn lanes and reversible lanes from other lanes. You know, obviously the twiddle or the 2-way left turn lane, big prominent feature in our local roadways. So this kind of one that's kind of next to it is purple, actually. So that is not that common here because it's for toll lanes, and it's only for use by vehicles with registered electronic toll collection accounts. So white, again, that's separation of traffic from the same direction, the right-hand edge of the roadway. That's what we use in our curb delineation projects and our edge line projects. And then truck, the red is for truck escape ramps, and then one-way roadways that shall not be entered and used in the direction from which the markers are visible. The truck escape ramps are pretty cool if you've ever driven in mountainous communities. They allow for trucks to basically go up the slope and get caught if they kind of lose control of their truck on a particularly bad slope. So those are pretty cool if you do see those. If you drive like I-70 in Colorado, you'll see that. And then blue, we're familiar with this primarily in parking facilities because it's for parking spaces with persons with disabilities. And so, you know, one of the kind of things that comes up, black is obviously not very frequently seen because, you know, asphalt is black and it would not show up, but you can use it in conjunction with other colors. You know, if you, especially on lighter color pavement, if you kind of need it to show up contrast for some of the other ones. So that's kind of when you would use black. I mean, obviously not on asphalt. So materials. So I mentioned before, a lot of what I do is upgrading local governments who are using paint on their roadways for their pavement markings and getting them into thermoplastic pavement markings if they even have pavement markings at all. So I have a big project actually pretty much all around Acadiana where we have identified roads that either have no pavement markings or paint, and then we've upgraded them to thermoplastic with the retro reflectivity. This I got this from another presentation where they mentioned you could add glass beads to paint. I'm not as familiar with that. Typically we only do it in thermoplastic, but maybe they have it somewhere. I'm not sure. Typically if we're using paint on local roads, it's super cheap. And then the other ones is raised pavement markers, delineators. We have a lot of delineators if you are coming from, or if you are living in the city of Lafayette. Really like delineators, really like channelizing devices. They're really great for controlling traffic movements in a safe manner. So I'm just going to take a break here. Does anybody have any questions or anything? Let's see. Just making sure and checking. I want to say thank you to everyone who's participating. I do tend to talk really fast, so I'm going to try to not talk as fast. So there's different kinds of longitudinal markings. There's the double line, and basically not supposed to cross the double line. Solid line discourages or prohibits crossing depending on what the application is. Broken line, you can cross. Dotted line, that kind of provides guidance or warning for lane function changes ahead. And if you go to the MATCD, you're going to I'm going to have some examples of pictures from the MATCD that show when you use it. And then line widths, I mean, that's a big part. So this is a big thing that comes into play, especially depending if you're already dealing with a roadway that has very tight widths. You have to make sure that you're accounting for that, the width of the pavement when you're dealing with also putting down a lot of these. Because I deal with a lot of roads that are just super tight with their cross sections. So I have to make sure that if I'm putting down pavement lines, they're not going to take away too much from traveling. So you get normal lines, they have wide lines, double lines, broken lines, and dotted lines. And they all have different aspects to them. So yellow center line pavement markings, so yellow line center markings, like these are kind of, this is, like I said, this is the most common thing that you're going to see is, you know, your 2-lane roadway, passing, no passing, passing one direction. And so there are requirements for when you do put down center line. Like I said, I do this a lot. I have to look at these kind of things a lot because we do look at a lot of local roads where they have no pavement markings. We want to see if we can put them down if we're having particular crash issues. So like again, ADT, which is annual daily traffic, just basically how much traffic there is on the road, how wide the road is. That's when you have to put these down if you meet these conditions, based on what's called our urban arterials, which are our major roadways in our area. Our collectors, they collect roads, they collect vehicles obviously off of our local roads and bring them onto the urban arterials. Then we have our rural arterials and collectors, basically, you know, not outside of the city limits generally. And then again, when engineering judgment indicates a need, and that's a lot of the work I do, is identifying when to put down certain types of center line markings depending on what the safety of a roadway is. So no passing zones, you know, obviously it's a big part of operating on a 2-lane facility is making sure that you have people have sight distance when they're passing another vehicle. It's you know, we do have, unfortunately, in Louisiana, a lot of what you would call head-on collisions, and that can create dangerous situations for motorists on our roadways. So it's very important that if you are passing another vehicle, you are doing it in the safe passing zone. And again, based on speed, sight distance. So lane transitions, wondering, you know, why a certain lane ends earlier or it takes a while, you know, basically it's all based on these different kind of factors. Either there's a formula for it, you know, 85th percentile speed limit, speed or statutory speed limit, whichever is greater. All these different factors go into what your transition is, along with if it's an urban or rural area. And that's all about allowing people to have enough time and space to make these type of decisions. So the application, this is an example of a 3-lane 2-way marking for changing direction of a center turn lane. You know, if you're kind of, it's kind of just like a good little thing that kind of shows the sight distance, buffer zone, no passing marking, that kind of thing, and just all these different kind of aspects that go into how these kind of things are applied and put on the roadway. So white lane pavement markings delineate traffic lanes with the same direction of travel, you know, basically solid white. You know, you have to stay within the lane. Broken white, you may change lanes if it's safe to do so. Kind of. And then dotted lines, you know, obviously you don't see them as much because they're just higher traffic facilities. And they basically let you know, when that things are going to be changing with regards to there's a lane opening up. You can also use it for a deceleration or acceleration lane, which we're going to show right here. But you see, there's all these illustrations in the NBTCD that kind of just show what it's supposed to look like, how it's supposed to work, why it's there. It's a very useful document. It is available online. So if you need to if you're very interested in it still, you can just Google it and you'll be able to access it and look through it. So this is an example of a deceleration and acceleration lane. So you can see kind of what it's supposed to look like, you know, how long it is, how long you have before you have to make your decision about getting into the lane, that kind of thing. So edge line pavement markings. You've already heard me talk a lot about edge line pavement markings. Like I said, they're very important for roadway safety. They are just really effective at letting people know, especially in dark conditions, and that's what's really important about the reflectivity. The vast majority of our fatal and serious injury crashes occur at nighttime conditions, dark conditions. So it's very important for us to give drivers the best facilities that we can in order for them to stay on the roadway. You know, we have certain warrants that we use for edge lines, like you have to put them on freeways, expressways, rural arterials. They're recommended for rural arterials and collectors. Again, minimum ADT of 3,000 vehicles a day, and where judgment indicates a need. I use them a lot on roadways that have significantly less ADT than that, because that's where we have a lot of people running off the road. I've had significant run off the road locations at roadways with, you know, 400 ADT, and we've worked to get edge line and curb delineation at those locations. So, you know, you would be surprised at where we're putting down a lot of this, and it's based on where there's a need, where people are having trouble operating vehicles safely, like in a curved roadway. Raised pavement markers. I do a lot of work with raised pavement markers too. Very fond of raised pavement markers. They really help just show, kind of like provide an extra edge to the pavement markings. And they do work under adverse weather conditions, which we experienced this morning in South Louisiana. And they have more durability than the markings. They also provide the tactile. So if you are driving distracted, which I hope you are, and never should, but for distracted drivers, they actually are effective at letting them know that they've kind of gone over into the center line area by shaking their car and hopefully shaking them awake and paying better attention and making the better decisions. And it was in this guidebook, they mentioned that sometimes they can be used as transverse rumble strips. We don't typically use them as that, or at least not in Lafayette. We typically use some raised thermoplastic and transverse, basically put them across the travel way. So like if you're coming to an intersection where people have a tendency to not realize that they're coming up to the intersection, the transverse rumble will kind of wake them up and help them realize that they are coming to a change in the roadway condition and they need to pay attention to the intersection. So the disadvantage is that they have a high installation cost. I don't think they're that much higher. I don't think that that's too, I personally disagree with this when I saw this, but I don't think the installation cost is cost prohibitive. They do, you know, obviously are more susceptible to damage because people run over them, and then obviously like they're putting a lot of pressure on them being on the roadway, and they're not like flat like the pavement markings, you know, so they can kind of get rubbed off. But I worked with a lot of parishes who really like them as a countermeasure and have actually worked to install them on their own system. So stop and yield signs. So, you know, obviously a stop line informs you that you have to stop. And, you know, they're different widths from 12 to 24 inches wide. And the yield is, you know, where you should yield to oncoming traffic. You know, we see those a lot in roundabouts, which we have a lot of roundabouts in Lafayette. So they're just different kinds of lines that when you're coming across an intersection or a change in the roadway facility, just let you know the best decisions to make. Big issue, obviously, we have is people disregarding the stop lines and stopping ahead of the stop line, going past the stop line and stopping at intersections. That doesn't make for a totally safe condition. Crosswalks. So we get a lot of requests for crosswalks. Crosswalks are not, you know, you have to meet certain conditions to put crosswalks, unfortunately. You know, they seem like they're great, and they are great, and we do like crosswalks, but they have to, we can't just go put them down everywhere because it will give people a false sense of security that they can cross a roadway without paying proper attention to the traffic control. And, you know, that's a huge issue. So we are judicious in where we place crosswalks. We do prefer where there's a pedestrian crossing location, maybe some sort of signalized intersection where we can stop traffic and let people cross there. We want to make people realize that there's a pedestrian crossing there. So that's, again, why we don't put them just willy-nilly wherever, because if drivers see them too frequently, they won't stop and yield to the pedestrian, which is what the law is. You have to yield to the pedestrian in the crosswalk. And then, obviously great around schools. Schools tend to generate a lot of pedestrian traffic, and we should be operating under a school zone anyway. So it's really cool to have places, designated places where kids can cross the road at, preferably with a crossing guard as well. So really good, important pavement marking, but have to be very specific and judicious about where you put that. And they have different kinds. They have the ones with the transverse lines. They have the ones with the diagonal lines. So it's you can have some different variations on crosswalks. So crosswalk studies. So you do have to do typically a crosswalk study to justify the installation of the crosswalk. It needs to be based on number of lanes, pedestrian volumes, where basically how many people are walking through this area, speed, if there's a median or not, what is the geometry of the areas. Basically, there's like a lot of driveways or intersections or something, you just want to look at it and see if it's safe to have people cross right there. If there's adjacent signalized intersections, the average daily traffic, and if there's street lighting. Street lighting obviously enhances the safety of a crosswalk significantly by lighting up the area so people don't cross it at night, and then they won't be seen by motorists. So there is some prohibitions on new marked crosswalks, on uncontrolled roadways with speed limits greater than 40 miles per hour. That tends to be very general, but it is a big issue with just giving drivers awareness that there's a pedestrian crossing there, and again that they need to respect the pedestrian crossing. You don't want to just, if people are driving on a higher speed roadway, they're just not going to have the time to make the decision to stop before the pedestrian enters it. So we just need to give people reliability of our system so they know where people are crossing at, and the drivers are given enough time to make that decision to be able to stop. So you do see a lot of words, symbols, and arrows. Obviously, like they're very good at providing information on the operation of the roadway. So they are required to be white with a minimum height of 6 feet. And you have the regulatory ones, which are stop, yield, right, left turn only, mile per hour things. Obviously, HOV lanes, that kind of thing. And then other preferential lane word markings. And then you have the ones that are more warning related. Obviously railroads, pedestrian crossings, schools, if there's a bump or a hump in the roadway, and then guides, and that's you'll see that primarily on interstate systems, what number, like interstate number you're on, that kind of thing. So we have some chevron and diagonal crosshatch markings, and these kind of just show you, these are just some different types of markings to discourage traffic on specific paved areas, such as shoulders or gore areas or flush median areas. And you kind of see that obviously the chevron separates traffic in the same direction. The yellow diagonal one separates opposite directions of traffic, and then paved ones, solid diagonal markings, yellow left side, white right side. We have a lot of examples of these in the NUTCD for specific pictures of them. So railroad grade crossings, that's a big one here. We have a lot of issues with people obeying that railroad crossings. So it's very important for people to just visualize and to know that they have a railroad crossing coming up ahead, that it's very unsafe for them to disregard the stop bar for that. And so we have some extra markings of that. So roundabout markings. So we have a lot of roundabouts here in Louisiana. And so we have some kind of a little bit more of a different situation. You see there's a lot, you see the white dotted interest line right there. We don't get that too frequently. Some roundabouts do have crosswalks in them. Lane use arrows, very important for people to know how to operate. Though I think this one, this illustration that they use is very interesting. Like I think this is like you make a left turn in this roundabout. Do not do that. But you double up your edge line, your lane line, that kind of thing they have in there. So this is kind of what it's mostly supposed to be. It kind of skewed in the picture. So, you know, and then you have like your truck apron, which we typically use to be red. So you see red colored pavements we use for the truck apron. And then you got your lane lines, your edge lines, and then your line, your lane use arrow lines. So delineators, we have a lot of delineators here. They're really good and helpful for just basically providing a vertical aspect of pavement markings, and then, you know, letting people know, okay, like when it's not, we sometimes use them here locally, and I will say only locally for Lafayette people in local government to as a median kind of thing, basically a left turn prohibition, and I think that's really effective. It's really worked out well for here. I've been involved in several of those types of things. So if you're driving on Congress Street, you can't make a left turn, that's because of me. Same thing with University and Coolidge, and I do not apologize for that. So sorry about that if you're on Coolidge and you want to just cross over, but you can't. But they're really great and effective. And like I said, they're basically just enhance, you know, we can put down that you can't make a left turn, you know, with pavement markings, but if you put down a delineator, it makes it a little bit more challenging for people to disregard that. So that's what I like it for. And other types of things that we've used them for, this is some kind of showing some edge line delineation that they're using. This kind of a little illustration, basically letting people know, like, don't run off right there. Kind of coming up to a curved bridge right there, and you know, that can be, you know, helpful. Let people know, like, basically don't leave the roadway right here. And we do use them for curb delineation. So we use signs for the delineation primarily, but you know, it's just an aspect of adding that vertical visible element of the changes in the roadway. So colored pavement. So when is colored pavement and other pavement types traffic control or not traffic control? So if it's not retroreflective, like it's brick, it's used for aesthetics, like in downtown Lafayette, New Orleans, some other places where they have that. That's not traffic control. It's not an official crosswalk. That's just cities being fancy. So if you do have colored pavement used in the travelway, on the flushway, if it's retroreflectivity, or if it's retroreflective, it's considered to be a traffic control device. And so there's some different colors like yellow, yellow flusher raised pavement markings separating traffic in opposite directions. White flusher raised channelizing islands. You see that a lot on turn lanes and such. And so you can use green colored pavement for marked bicycle and facilities. We do not have any here, except maybe on St. Mary. Yeah, St. Mary is like the only place I think they have that, but it's not that common. We also have red. So that might be allowed to be used in Louisiana. I don't know, but we use them a lot for red truck aprons. And then this is this is Ambassador Caffrey in front of Whole Foods. It's a traffic island. That actually was just replaced and put with mountable traffic island. So like if you hit it, you won't hit a hard curb. So go check that out if you like driving down Ambassador Caffrey. But obviously it's separating conflicts, you know, it's channelizing that traffic, it's making people safer when they're turning and in and out of businesses. They don't have to worry about someone turning against them, basically disregarding the pavement marking, and you know, it kind of adds that protective element to it. And then then we have some delineators. It's kind of been used for the same thing on the part of Ambassador Caffrey in front of Whataburger, again, kind of channelizing those left turns, making it safer so you don't have to worry about someone from the business on the other side, which is the Domino's. I think I know with the Domino's you cannot make you cannot turn left out of there to get onto Ambassador Caffrey because we have these posted delineators there. So it's a lot safer for everyone. You can only kind of make a left turn into the Domino's, not out of it. So rumble strips. So rumble strips, obviously big aspect of safety, very important for keeping people on the roadway, ensuring that people don't run off the road. And so you can do You actually can do pavement markings into the rumble strip. Sometimes that's done. You can also do them, obviously, if you have a center line rumble, you have to have it with the pavement marking over on the rumble strip. And it just helps, again, people make the best decisions to stay on the road. It's the only thing that's effective for distracted driving in terms of what we can put on the roadway to make people wake up and be like, hey, don't run off the roadway because you're driving distracted. Don't cross over the center line because you're distracted. It you know, obviously shakes the vehicle, makes people realize that they're making a bad decision. All right, so I am going to open it up to questions. That's pretty much it. So like if you have any questions, like please raise your hand, let me know. I will definitely take them. I don't. You can also put it in the chat pod now. I have it open, or you can put it into the Q&A. So I don't think that we have any. So if you think of anything you want to know further,